Mr. President, I had the opportunity yesterday, along with the Coast Guard and the resident commissioner of Puerto Rico, Jennifer Gonzalez, to visit San Juan, Puerto Rico, and firsthand see some of the devastation that has impacted this U.S. territory. And I would summarize it by saying that what I saw is over 3.5 million American citizens potentially on the verge of a serious and growing humanitarian crisis. There are a lot of reasons for this. The first is that Puerto Rico has been in the eye of not one but three storms. The first was Hurricane Irma that impacted it just a few weeks ago, followed, of course, by the devastation of Hurricane Maria. And pre-existing these two things is a very significant fiscal crisis that placed extraordinary constraints on the ability of the territory's government, both to prepare for this storm and now to respond to it. Our traditional model of hurricane response, one that unfortunately because of numerous storms I've gotten to know well as a resident of Florida, is that FEMA basically comes in support of the state. So Florida gets hit by a storm, or Texas gets hit by a storm, and FEMA comes in and tells the state, we are here to help, you tell us where to go, you tell us what you need, and we will provide those resources that you tell us to the places you want us. And it works that way. The President issues an emergency declaration, it opens up FEMA and other disaster relief, and then the state's government directs, they tell them, this is what we need, this is where we need it, and this is the stuff we can handle on our own. In the case of Puerto Rico, that model will not work. It will not work first and foremost because, as I said earlier, the financial and fiscal constraints the island faces have limited its capacity to build its own internal ability to respond. They had just finished repairing the damage from Irma a few weeks ago. So there are literally not nearly enough basic things like those wooden poles to hold up the electric lines, or the transformers that go attached to them, or even the lines themselves, and in many cases the fuel to power the crews to get to the work sites. It won't work because in many cases the government of Puerto Rico still does not have a full assessment of the damage of the storm, because while in San Juan communication is still severely limited, in most of the other areas of the Big Island and the smaller islands, communications is non-existent. Something brought firsthand to me yesterday when we visited one of the Coast Guard centers and watched as much of the response that they're conducting there is limited to a paper map on a wall with some sticky notepads and 4 landlines that they hoped people could call in and give them some updates on what they were seeing in the field from a satellite phone. Now, hopefully that has improved over the last 24 hours as more Coast Guard vessels came in to support communications, but we still have large parts of Puerto Rico that have not communicated with the rest of the island or the government or the outside world, for that matter, going on 6 days. There are also logistical challenges. In most of if not all of the 50 states, certainly in my home state of Florida, we just saw the largest power restoration effort in the history of the world. At least that's what they're claiming. Literally, we saw, I don't know, hundreds of those bucket trucks from all over the United States, all 50 states, and even Canada coming in with these prearranged contracts and their crews to restore power. And even with that dramatic level of response, there were people without power until late this weekend, and there are still a couple thousand people in Florida that have no power. You can't drive a convoy of trucks into Puerto Rico. They have to come in on a barge, and those barges take 7 days from Jacksonville and 5 days from Miami, plus whatever time it takes to travel and position those crews to get there. And you don't just have to deliver the crews, you have to deliver the supplies in order to be able to restore power. And what is the practical impact of not having power? Well, not having power, the practical impact of it is not simply convenience. For many people, it's life and death. Imagine in an area outside of San Juan where someone is a diabetic and depends on insulin that has to be refrigerated. That medicine's gone bad by now if they haven't run out. Imagine if someone needs dialysis once or twice a week. It's probably been longer than that since they've had it. Imagine if you were undergoing chemotherapy for cancer. That's not going to happen this week or next unless things dramatically change. These are real challenges. And I raise them only because this is a disaster that will require an intensity of effort on behalf of the federal government that you would not traditionally see in a storm that impacted the mainland. for the reasons I've outlined and many, many more. Now, the good news is that earlier today you saw the White House engage even more in terms of some of the things that they're doing, more DOD, more Department of Defense assets. As a result of some restoration at the airport, the ability to land more planes more quickly. So again, more things coming in. The port opened fairly quickly. But the challenges remain. That even if today we could approve $10 billion of assistance and somehow figured out a way to deliver it to Puerto Rico in the next 24 hours, they would still be challenged to take it from the airport or the seaport and deliver it to the places that need it the most. Because there are roads that are still not clear, because we still don't have a full assessment of where the damage is and the need is most. And, quite frankly, because there are probably roads and bridges in parts of Puerto Rico that will collapse if one of these big trucks drive over them. I say this because there is only one entity in the world with the capacity to respond to all these various issues, and that is the federal government of the United States. Leveraging the power of the Department of Defense and an assortment of other agencies, it remains the only institution, certainly in our country and probably in the world, with the capacity to respond quickly and effectively to the crisis at hand. And so while response to this storm will take a significant amount of patience, it will also take a significant amount of urgency. For each day that goes by, this crisis will get worse, not better. And I fear that if, in fact, there is not enough urgency in the response, we will be talking about a very different set of stories in the days to come. I hope I am wrong with all of my heart, but I fear that when communications does come back up and when we start getting more access to some of these areas that have been cut off, we're going to start learning that the toll and the impact of the storm is far worse than we had imagined. And I pray, with all my heart, that someone will watch this video on YouTube one day and say, oh, look, he was exaggerating. It wasn't that bad after all. I hope that's what happens. But I fear it will not. And every day that goes by, it'll only get worse. I don't believe it's fair to say that the response up to this point is because some people don't care or because they haven't paid enough attention to it. I honestly think it's just a challenge that is unique and that requires us to respond to it in ways that we wouldn't traditionally respond for the factors I've just pointed out. In most places in the mainland, if not all, the states have a certain capacity internally to address this. But Puerto Rico, for the challenges that I've just outlined, and particularly because of the storm that just passed, has already had many of those resources depleted. There's positive news today. The USS Comfort, that's a hospital ship, is on its way. But again, it will take it a number of days to get there. The federal government has agreed to a 100% federal match, which usually means the federal government paid a portion of it and the states pay the rest. The federal government for the next 180 days has agreed to 100% payment of these services. And that'll be critical because these restoration crews are going to want to know how their costs are going to be paid if they show up and begin to restore power. But I just think it's imperative that we don't lose focus and don't lose sight on what's at hand, because there are over 3 million American citizens in danger, and a number of them, perhaps in the thousands, that already have existing vulnerabilities in severe danger of losing their life in extraordinary human suffering. And so I want to thank my colleagues on both sides of the aisle that throughout the day have expressed a tremendous amount of interest in wanting to know how they can be helpful and what they can do. I think the most important thing we need to do now is to continue to drive the sense of urgency, to do all we can to bring to bear all of the resources the federal government can bring to assist in this recovery. And then we'll be able to work together on not just rebuilding Puerto Rico, but helping her to rebuild so that she is stronger, more prosperous, and more stable than ever. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.